She thought she could disappear into the night like smoke dissolving into darkness, and that was her first mistake of many. Naomi Brooks had spent 6 months planning this escape down to the smallest detail, mapping every road out of Chicago, memorizing bus schedules and train departures, saving cash in small amounts so no one would notice the growing stash hidden beneath her floorboards. She had waited for the perfect night when the rain would wash away any trail she might leave behind in her wake. Her bags were packed with only essentials, her old life stuffed into two worn suitcases that held everything she owned in this world. She was 45 minutes from the city limits when the first set of headlights appeared in her rearview mirror, moving too fast, too deliberately, too purposefully to be coincidence. Her heart began hammering against her ribs as she pressed harder on the accelerator. Then she saw the roadblock ahead and her blood turned to ice water in her veins, freezing her from the inside out. Black SUVs arranged in a perfect line across the empty highway, men in dark suits standing like statues carved from shadow and silence. She slammed the brakes and yanked the steering wheel hard, trying to turn around and find another way out of this trap. But more headlights were flooding her mirrors from behind, boxing her in completely with military precision. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, and she grabbed it with trembling fingers that could barely hold the device steady. The message was from an unknown number, but she knew exactly who had sent it before reading a single word. "Did you really think I would let you leave, Naomi? Turn the car around and come home. We need to talk." Choi Yi-sun, the Korean crime lord who had been circling her life for the past 2 years like a shark sensing blood in dark waters. The man who had made it terrifyingly clear that he considered her his, whether she had agreed to that arrangement or not. She sat frozen in her car, rain hammering against the windshield, trapped between the roadblock ahead and the SUVs behind. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, no escape route she hadn't already considered and found blocked. The driver's side door was wrenched open so suddenly that she screamed, the sound swallowed by the rain and wind howling around her. Strong hands gripped her arms and pulled her from the vehicle with terrifying ease, as if she weighed nothing at all. And then he was there, standing before her in the downpour, rain streaming down his face like tears he would never actually shed. Choi Yi-sun was devastatingly handsome in a way that had always made her uncomfortable, all sharp angles and controlled power barely contained beneath the surface. His dark eyes swept over her, taking in her travel clothes, her wet hair plastered to her face, the fear she couldn't hide no matter how hard she tried. He didn't look angry, which somehow made everything worse than if he had been screaming at her. He looked disappointed, and that expression cut deeper than rage ever could have managed. "Bring her," he said quietly to his men, then turned and walked back toward his waiting car without another word. It put her in the back seat of a black sedan, her wrists zip tied in front of her like a common criminal being transported to prison. Yi-sun slid in beside her, water dripping from his perfectly tailored suit, creating a wall of tense silence between them. "Where are you taking me?" Her voice came out steadier than she expected, considering how her heart was trying to escape through her throat. "Home." The single word carried weight she didn't fully understand but felt pressing down on her anyway. "That apartment was never my home, and you know that as well as I do. Then we'll find you a new one within my compound where I can ensure you won't try something this foolish again. You can't keep me prisoner just because you've decided you want me in your life." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch despite all her efforts to remain unaffected. "Watch me." The drive to his compound took 30 minutes through empty streets made slick by the relentless rain falling from black skies. Naomi stared out the window, watching the city she had tried to escape blur past like a dream dissolving upon waking. She thought about the first time she had met Yi-sun, nearly 2 years ago at a charity gala she had been working as a caterer. He had looked at her across the crowded room and something had shifted in the air between them, something electric and dangerous. She had tried to ignore it, tried to pretend she hadn't felt the same pull that clearly gripped him. But he was persistent in ways that were terrifying and flattering in equal measure, always appearing wherever she went, always watching from shadows she couldn't quite see. He had helped her when her mother got sick, paying medical bills she could never have afforded on her catering salary. He had gotten her brother out of trouble with local gangs who had been pressuring him to join their ranks. But every gift came with invisible strings attached, threads that wrapped around her life until she realized she was completely tangled in his web. And when she finally understood the full scope of what he wanted from her, she knew she had to run. He didn't want an employee or a friend or even a casual girlfriend he could see when convenient. He wanted complete possession, total ownership, a claim on her life that left no room for her own choices or dreams. So she had started planning her escape in secret, knowing that discovery would mean losing any chance of ever getting away. 6 months of careful preparation, destroyed in a single night by a man who seemed to know her moves before she made them. The compound was even more impressive at night, surrounded by high walls and security systems that probably cost more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. They drove through multiple checkpoints, each one reminding her how impossible escape would be from this place. Yi-sun led her inside personally, his hand firm on her lower back, guiding her through corridors she had never seen during her previous visits. This was deeper into his territory than she had ever been allowed before tonight. He stopped before a door that looked identical to all the others they had passed in the long hallway. When he opened it, she saw a bedroom suite that was luxurious but clearly designed for containment rather than comfort. The windows were reinforced with bars disguised as decorative ironwork that couldn't quite hide their true purpose. The door was solid, heavy, meant to keep someone inside rather than protecting from threats without. There was no lock on the inside. You'll stay here until I decide you can be trusted not to run at the first opportunity that presents itself. This is kidnapping, Yi Sun. This is illegal no matter how much money or power you have in this city. This is protection. He cut the zip ties from her wrists with a small knife he produced from his pocket. From the world, from yourself, from the foolish decisions you seem determined to keep making despite my best efforts. I don't need your protection, and I certainly never asked for it or wanted it. That's precisely why you need it so desperately. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the frame before leaving. Get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning when you're calm enough to be reasonable. I'm being reasonable. You're the one kidnapping women and locking them in rooms like medieval prisoners. Something flickered across his face, there and gone too quickly for her to identify the emotion behind it. Perhaps, but you're still staying here until I'm satisfied you understand how things are going to work between us. The door closed with a solid thunk that echoed through the silent room like a death knell for her freedom. She heard the lock engage from the outside, sealing her fate with cold mechanical finality. Naomi explored every inch of her prison once she was alone with her panic and her racing thoughts. The bathroom was fully stocked with toiletries and towels. The closet contained clothes in her exact size. The bed was comfortable and the sheets were expensive. A gilded cage was still a cage, no matter how beautiful the bars that held her inside it. She found no obvious weaknesses in the windows, no hidden exits in the walls, no way out that she could exploit with the limited resources available. He had planned this containment as carefully as she had planned her failed escape. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her anger and fear, pulling her down into fitful sleep filled with dreams of running through endless corridors that always led back to the same locked door. She woke to morning light filtering through the reinforced windows and the sound of her door being unlocked from outside. A young woman entered carrying a breakfast tray, her eyes downcast, her manner suggesting she had performed this task many times before. "Mr. Choi will see you after you've eaten and dressed," the woman said quietly, setting the tray on a small table near the window. "Tell Mr. Choi he can wait until hell freezes over for all I care about his schedule." The woman's expression flickered with something that might have been sympathy or might have been warning. "I would recommend eating, miss. You'll need your strength for the conversation ahead." Then she was gone, the door locking behind her, leaving Naomi alone with eggs and toast and the growing certainty that she was in far more trouble than she had initially realized. She ate because she was hungry, and refusing food would only weaken her position in whatever confrontation was coming. She dressed in clothes that weren't hers because her own luggage had been left behind on that rainy highway. When the door opened again, Yi Sun stood in the hallway, looking freshly showered and impeccably dressed as if he hadn't spent the previous night orchestrating the kidnapping of a woman who wanted nothing to do with him. "Walk with me," he said, and it wasn't a request despite the polite phrasing. He led her through the compound, showing her gardens and libraries and spaces that would have been beautiful if they weren't part of her prison. Other people moved around them, staff and guards and others whose roles she couldn't quite determine. Everyone looked away when they passed, as if making eye contact with her would be somehow dangerous or inappropriate. She wondered how many other women had walked these paths as prisoners dressed in borrowed clothes. They ended up in a study lined with books and dominated by a massive desk that probably cost more than her mother's house. He gestured for her to sit in a leather chair while he remained standing, establishing a power dynamic she had no way to challenge. "I'm going to explain this situation to you once, and I need you to listen carefully before you respond. I'm listening because I have no choice, but that doesn't mean I'll agree to anything you say." He nodded slowly, accepting her terms for the moment at least. "Your mother is sick. Your brother has debts he cannot pay. Your job barely covers your own expenses, let alone their mounting problems. How do you know so much about my family's finances and their personal business? I know everything about you, Naomi. Every detail of your life has been thoroughly investigated and documented since the first night I saw you." The admission should have terrified her, and it did, but there was something else beneath the fear. A strange sort of validation that she mattered enough for someone to pay this much attention. That's stalking, not romance. There's a significant difference between them. In your world, perhaps. He moved to sit on the edge of his desk, closer to her now, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "In my world, it's simply due diligence before making an important investment. I'm not an investment. I'm a person with my own life and dreams and choices to make. You're a woman I want, and I've decided to have you. The only question remaining is whether you'll accept this reality gracefully or fight it uselessly." She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor behind her with an ugly sound. I will never accept being owned by anyone, especially not a criminal who thinks money and power give him the right to control other people's lives. He smiled slightly, and the expression made him look almost human for a moment. I told you once that I admire your spirit. I wasn't lying about that. Then let me go and find someone who actually wants to be with you voluntarily. No, the single word carried absolute finality, a door slamming closed on any negotiation. But I will make you a proposition that you should consider carefully before rejecting. What kind of proposition? 6 months. Give me 6 months as my guest here, getting to know me properly without the outside world's interference. If at the end of that time you still want to leave, I'll let you go with enough money to set your mother and brother up for life. And if you're lying about letting me go, then you're no worse off than you are now, trapped with no leverage and no options available to you. She considered his words, searching for the trap she knew had to be hidden somewhere within them. What do you expect from me during these 6 months? Your company, your conversation, the chance to show you who I really am beneath the reputation that precedes me everywhere I go. That's all, just talking and spending time together. I won't force myself on you, Naomi. I'm many things, but I'm not that kind of monster despite what you might believe. You literally kidnapped me last night and locked me in a room like a prisoner, to keep you safe and to give us this opportunity. Not to harm you or violate you against your will. She laughed bitterly at the distinction he was trying to make. So you'll imprison me, but you won't assault me. Is that supposed to make me feel grateful? It's supposed to make you feel safe enough to give this a genuine chance before writing me off completely. She didn't feel safe. She felt trapped and scared and furious in equal measures that kept shifting moment by moment. But she also recognized that she had no real options available to her right now. If I agree to this insane proposition, what are the actual rules and boundaries involved? You'll have freedom to move around the compound during daylight hours with an escort for your protection. You'll join me for meals and evening conversations. You'll have access to anything you need except communication devices and transportation. So I'm still a prisoner, just with longer chains than the room you locked me in last night. Think of yourself as a guest with security concerns that require certain accommodations be made. That's a lovely way of describing imprisonment without using the actual word for it. He stood and moved closer to her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken against her will. She hated her body for responding to him even now. I could make this much harder than I'm choosing to make it, Naomi. I could lock you in that room for months without conversation or company or hope. I'm offering you a different path, a path that still leads wherever you want it to go, not where I choose. All paths lead somewhere. At least this one gives you a voice in the journey, even if the destination is already determined. She wanted to hit him, to scream, to claw at his handsome face until he understood the violation he was committing against her autonomy. But she also knew that violence would only make things worse. 6 months, she said finally, and then you let me go with the money you promised. If you still want to leave after 6 months, yes, that's my word and I don't break my promises. The word of a criminal doesn't exactly inspire confidence in me. Then let my actions over the coming months speak louder than any words could manage. She didn't trust him. She couldn't trust him. But she had no other options, and at least this way she might find a weakness she could exploit for a real escape later. Fine, 6 months, but I'm not pretending to enjoy this or playing happy hostage for your benefit. I would expect nothing less from you. He smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes with genuine warmth. Welcome to your new home, Naomi. I hope you'll come to see it that way eventually. The first month was the hardest, an endless battle of wills that exhausted them both in different ways. Naomi pushed every boundary she could find, testing the limits of her captivity constantly and creatively. She tried to bribe guards, explored every inch of accessible grounds for weaknesses, and treated Yi-sun with barely concealed contempt during their required interactions. He never lost his temper, never raised his voice, never treated her with anything less than careful respect even when she was being deliberately difficult. His patience was maddening in ways she couldn't quite articulate. The staff grew accustomed to her presence, some of them warming to her despite the circumstances of her residency. She learned their names, their stories, the small details that made them human rather than faceless servants. The cook was a grandmother who had worked for Yi-sun's family for 30 years, through good times and terrible ones. The head of security had a daughter in medical school who called every Sunday afternoon without fail. These people weren't the villains she had expected to find surrounding a crime lord in his fortress of solitude. They were just people doing their jobs, living their lives in the shadow of a powerful and dangerous man. She began to understand that the world she had stumbled into was more complicated than simple categories of good and evil. There were shades of gray everywhere she looked, moral complexity that challenged her previous assumptions. Yi-sun himself remained the biggest mystery, revealing himself in small pieces that never quite formed a complete picture. He read classical philosophy and modern thrillers with equal enthusiasm, keeping a library that would make any scholar envious. He spoke 4 languages fluently and was learning a 5th because he found the mental challenge enjoyable. He had a younger sister in Seoul who called every week to argue about their mother's health and their father's legacy. He practiced martial arts every morning at dawn, a routine she watched from her window without admitting she was doing so. He moved like water, fluid and powerful, completely at ease in his body in ways that made her uncomfortable to observe. And every evening, without fail, he joined her for dinner and conversation that ranged across every topic imaginable. He asked about her childhood, her dreams, her opinions on politics and art, and the meaning of life itself. She tried to give him nothing, answering in monosyllables and hostile silences that bounced off his persistent friendliness. But gradually, despite her best efforts, she found herself talking more than she intended. She told him about her father's death when she was 12, a car accident that had left her mother a widow with 2 children and no insurance. She described her brother's struggles with addiction and recovery, the constant fear of relapse. She confessed her dream of opening a restaurant someday, a place where food was made with love and served to people who needed comfort and connection. He listened without interruption, asking questions that showed he was genuinely paying attention. "Why haven't you pursued that dream before now?" he asked one evening as they sat in the garden watching the sunset paint the sky. "Because dreams require money and time and privilege that people like me don't have access to. People like you, people born without silver spoons or safety nets or family connections that open doors automatically. And yet here you are, living in luxury with all the time in the world to plan and dream. I'm here because you kidnapped me, not because I chose this life for myself. Perhaps, but circumstances don't change the opportunity that exists within them. Are you suggesting I should be grateful for my imprisonment? I'm suggesting you might make better use of this time than simply counting down days until you can leave." She didn't have a good response to that, so she changed the subject to something less challenging. But his words echoed in her mind later that night as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The second month brought unexpected changes that she hadn't anticipated when she agreed to this arrangement. Yi-sun began including her in aspects of his life that went beyond simple companionship during meals. He invited her to join him when he met with legitimate business partners, observing negotiations and deal-making from a quiet corner. He explained his operations to her in broad strokes, the empire he had inherited from his father and was working to transform into something different. Not entirely legal yet, but moving in that direction with careful planning. "Why are you showing me all this?" she asked after a particularly complex meeting about real estate development projects. "Because I want you to understand what my life actually involves, not just the rumors and assumptions you brought with you. Understanding won't make me forgive the way you brought me here against my will. I'm not asking for forgiveness yet, I'm asking for perspective." She was developing perspective whether she wanted to or not, her black and white views slowly gaining uncomfortable shades of gray. Yi-sun was building schools in poor neighborhoods, funding after-school programs, creating jobs for people who desperately needed them. Yes, some of his money came from illegal sources that she preferred not to examine too closely, but the impact of that money on real communities was undeniably positive in ways she couldn't ignore. She started helping with some of the charitable work, initially just to pass time and then with genuine interest in the outcomes. She visited a community center he had built, seeing children who might otherwise be on the streets finding safe spaces instead. She met with single mothers whose rent he paid anonymously, keeping families together who would otherwise be homeless. She heard stories of second chances given to people the rest of society had written off completely. "This doesn't erase what you are," she told him one evening after a particularly moving visit to a shelter he funded. "I know, but it's part of what I'm trying to become, and that has to count for something. Does it? Can good deeds really balance out bad ones? I don't know. But I'd rather die trying to tip the scales than accept that I'm beyond redemption simply because of where I started." She thought about her own judgments, the assumptions she had made about who he was before she really knew him. She had been so certain he was a monster wearing a human face, but reality was proving more complicated. He still held her prisoner. He still controlled her movement and communication and basic freedom. But he did so with increasing respect for her personhood, loosening restrictions as trust slowly built between them. By the third month, she could walk the grounds without an escort during daylight hours. By the fourth, she had access to a phone that could call her mother and brother with calls monitored but not restricted. Her mother's voice on the phone made her cry the first time she heard it after months of silence and separation. She couldn't explain her situation honestly, so she invented a job opportunity overseas that required her to be unreachable. Her mother seemed suspicious but chose not to push, perhaps sensing that the truth would be more disturbing than comfortable lies. They talked about doctor's appointments and medication adjustments and the small details of daily life. Her brother was doing well, staying sober, working a construction job that kept him too tired to get into trouble. The debts that had been crushing him had mysteriously disappeared, paid off by an anonymous benefactor neither of them mentioned directly. "Are you happy?" her mother asked during their third phone call, cutting through small talk with maternal intuition. I'm learning to be content, which isn't quite the same thing but might be close enough. That sounds like something a prisoner would say, not a woman living her best life. Naomi laughed despite herself at how perceptive her mother remained. Maybe I'm a prisoner of my own expectations about what life should look like, or maybe someone is keeping you somewhere you don't entirely want to be. Would it matter if they were? Her mother was quiet for a long moment before answering carefully. It would matter why they were doing it and how they were treating you while they did. He treats me like I'm the most precious thing in his world, even when I'm being horrible to him. Then maybe you should stop being quite so horrible and see what happens next. The fifth month brought the crisis that changed everything between them permanently. An old enemy of Yi Sun's father had decided to make a move against the current generation, targeting businesses and people connected to Choi operations. The compound went into lockdown, security tripled, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Naomi was confined to her room again for her own protection, meals delivered by armed guards who looked like they expected an attack at any moment. She could hear raised voices and footsteps at odd hours, the normal rhythm of compound life disrupted. Yi Sun stopped coming to see her, his attention consumed by the threat that was apparently quite serious. She found herself worried about him, an emotion that surprised her with its intensity. 3 days into the lockdown, she woke to the sound of gunfire somewhere on the property. She scrambled out of bed, heart pounding, pressing herself against the wall as if that would provide any real protection. The door burst open, and for a terrifying moment she thought she was about to die. But it was Yi Sun, blood on his shirt, a gun in his hand, his eyes wild with an emotion she had never seen before. "Come with me now." He grabbed her hand and pulled her into the hallway without waiting for agreement. They ran through corridors she had never seen, down stairs that seemed to descend forever into the earth. She could hear shouting behind them, more gunfire, the sounds of a battle she didn't understand. He pushed her into a room that looked like a bunker, walls lined with supplies and equipment she couldn't identify. Then he locked the door and slumped against it, clearly exhausted and possibly wounded. "What's happening?" she demanded, kneeling beside him to check his injuries. "Are you shot? Not my blood. One of my men who didn't make it." His voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of someone who had seen too much death to be moved by individual losses. "Who's attacking us? People who want what I have and think killing me is the easiest way to get it. And are they going to succeed?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Not if I have anything to say about it. I have too much to live for now." They spent hours in that bunker, waiting for word that the situation above had been resolved. He held her hand at some point without either of them acknowledging the contact directly. She should have been terrified. She was terrified. But she was also aware that she didn't want him to die, that the thought of a world without him in it was suddenly unbearable. "If we survive this," she said quietly during a lull in the distant sounds of battle, "I want you to tell me the truth about something." "What truth? Why me? Out of all the women in the world, why did you become obsessed with someone who wanted nothing to do with you?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried more vulnerability than she had ever heard from him. "Because you looked at me like I was a person, not a power or a threat or an opportunity to exploit." That first night at the gala, when our eyes met across that room, I saw someone who hadn't already decided who I was. I decided pretty quickly after I learned more about you. But you gave me a moment of being just a man, nothing more, nothing less. You have no idea how rare that is in my world. So you kidnapped me because I made eye contact at a party. I pursued you because you made me feel human. I brought you here because I couldn't stand the thought of losing you to your own determination to escape. That's obsession, not love. There's a difference. Is there? He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes intense even in the dim light of the bunker. Where exactly is the line between wanting someone so desperately you can't let them go and loving them so deeply you can't imagine life without them? She didn't have an answer for that question. She wasn't sure one existed. The attack was repelled by morning, the enemy neutralized through methods she chose not to ask about directly. The compound slowly returned to normal, but something between them had fundamentally shifted during those hours underground. She stopped counting down the days until her 6 months were over. She stopped looking for escape routes and testing boundaries. She started actually talking to him during their evening conversations instead of just going through the motions. He noticed the change without commenting on it directly, giving her space to find her own path without pressure. His patience, which had once seemed infuriating, now felt like a gift she hadn't known she needed. She asked questions about his childhood, his family, the experiences that had shaped him into the man he was today. He answered honestly, even when the truth was ugly, trusting her with the darkest parts of his history. He had killed his first man at 19, defending his mother from an attacker who broke into their home while his father was away on business. He still had nightmares about it sometimes, the weight of a life taken even in justified circumstances. He had been engaged once, an arranged match with a powerful family's daughter who saw him as a stepping stone to status. She had been sleeping with his best friend the entire time, a betrayal that had taught him to trust no one completely. Until Naomi. until a woman who wanted nothing from him except to be left alone, who looked at his wealth and power as burdens rather than attractions. I'm starting to understand why you targeted me, she admitted one evening as they walked through the garden together. Targeted makes it sound so predatory and calculated. Wasn't it? You investigated every detail of my life, inserted yourself into my problems, made yourself indispensable before I even knew what was happening. I made myself useful to someone who deserved help. The investigation was just due diligence. The semantics might be different, but the result is the same. I'm here against my will because you decided you wanted me. Do you still feel that way, that you're here entirely against your will? She stopped walking and turned to face him, searching his features for the monster she had been so certain lived behind that handsome face. I don't know how I feel anymore. That's the honest truth that scares me more than anything else. Then let me ask you something that might help clarify things. What? Your 6 months is almost over. In 3 weeks, you'll have the choice I promised you. Leave with the money and never see me again, or stay and see what we might build together. I know the timeline, ye son. I've been counting. Have you decided what you're going to choose? She had been avoiding that question, pushing it away every time it surfaced in her thoughts. The choice that had seemed so obvious in the beginning was now impossibly complicated. What if I choose to leave? Will you really let me go? I gave you my word. I won't break it, no matter how much I want to. And you'll let me walk away without interference, without surveillance, without any of your men following to make sure I'm safe. He hesitated, and she saw the struggle in his eyes between his promise and his instincts. I will let you walk away completely free. But I won't pretend it won't destroy me to watch you go. That's emotional manipulation, telling me that my choice will hurt you. It's honesty, which is what you asked for from the beginning. Leaving will hurt me. Staying would make me happier than I have any right to be. Those are just facts. She turned away from him, staring at the garden they had walked together so many times. How had this place stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like something else entirely? I need time to think. Real time, alone, without your presence influencing my thoughts. Take all the time you need. I'll stay away until you're ready to give me an answer. He kept his word, disappearing from her daily life for the final 3 weeks of their agreed arrangement. Meals were delivered to her room, but she had full freedom of the compound without ever running into him. She used the time to think deeply about what she actually wanted from her life. Freedom had been her obsession for so long, but freedom to do what exactly? Go back to her tiny apartment and her exhausting job, return to a life where every month was a struggle to make ends meet. She had options now that she hadn't had before, money and connections that could actually make her restaurant dream possible. But was she willing to accept those options from the man who had taken her freedom to give them to her? She talked to her mother again, more honestly this time, though still not fully truthfully. She described a complicated relationship with a powerful man who had done both terrible and wonderful things. Do you love him? Her mother asked directly. I don't know, maybe. How do you know when it's love and not just Stockholm syndrome or gratitude or habit? Love feels like coming home to a place you've never been before. It feels like being terrified and safe at the same time. It feels like choosing someone over and over again, even when choosing them doesn't make any logical sense. That sounds more like insanity than love. There's often very little difference between the two. The night before her deadline, Naomi couldn't sleep. She walked the grounds in the moonlight, visiting all the places that had become meaningful during her time here. The garden where they had their first real conversation without hostility. The library where he had shown her his grandmother's first edition poetry collection. The kitchen where the cook had taught her family recipes passed down through generations. She ended up at the bunker where they had hidden together during the attack, the place where everything had shifted between them. She sat on the cold floor and let herself feel everything she had been suppressing. She was angry at him for taking her choice away, for forcing this connection that she hadn't asked for or wanted. She was grateful for the help he had given her family, the opportunities he had created from nothing. She was scared of what staying would mean, what it would say about her that she could love a man who had imprisoned her. She was more scared of leaving and spending the rest of her life wondering what might have been. I know you're there, she said without turning around. You're terrible at staying away when you're worried. He stepped out of the shadows, looking as sleepless as she felt. I wanted to make sure you were safe, wandering alone at night. This is the safest place in the city. You've made sure of that. Old habits. He sat beside her on the bunker floor, maintaining careful distance between them. Have you made your decision? I've been making it and unmaking it 100 times a day for weeks. Then don't make it tonight. Sleep on it one more time and tell me tomorrow. What if I never feel ready to make this choice? Then I'll wait. As long as it takes, I'll wait for you to be sure. She turned to look at him, this complicated man who had caused her so much pain and awakened feelings she didn't know she was capable of experiencing. What if I told you I want to stay, but I'm not ready to forgive you for how this began? I would say that's fair. Forgiveness isn't a requirement for building something together. And what if I need things to be different, more equal, less controlled by your decisions and your needs? We'll figure out how to make that happen. I'm not interested in owning you, Naomi. I want a partner, not a possession. That's not what it felt like when you blocked every exit from the city to keep me from leaving. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to become the man who deserves your choice to stay. She reached out and took his hand, the first time she had initiated physical contact between them. His fingers trembled slightly as they interlocked with hers. I'm choosing to stay. But I'm also choosing to make you work for every single moment of happiness we might have together. His smile was luminous in the darkness, transforming his face into something almost beautiful. I would expect nothing less from you. 1 year later, Naomi stood in the kitchen of her own restaurant, preparing for opening night with a team she had personally trained. The dream she had carried for so long was finally becoming reality. Yi-sun had funded the venture but kept his distance from the actual operation, respecting her need to build something that was truly her own. He showed up as a customer sometimes, always reserving the same corner table, always leaving generous tips that embarrassed the staff. They lived together now in a house they had chosen together that was neither his compound nor her tiny apartment. Something new, something that belonged to both of them equally. Their relationship wasn't perfect. They fought about his work, about the illegal elements he was still extracting himself from slowly. They disagreed about security levels, about how many guards were really necessary for daily life. But they also laughed together, dreamed together, built something from the wreckage of their terrible beginning. She had learned that love could grow in the strangest soil if given enough time and patience. He had learned that possession was not the same as partnership, that someone choosing to stay was infinitely more valuable than someone being forced to remain. Are you nervous? He asked, appearing in the kitchen doorway as the first guests began arriving for opening night. Terrified. What if they hate it? What if nobody comes back after tonight? Then we'll figure out what went wrong and try again. That's what we do. I'm not going anywhere, Naomi. This is your dream, but I'll be beside you through every success and failure if you'll let me. She crossed the kitchen and kissed him, something she did freely now without analyzing the implications. I'll let you, this time. This time, should I be worried about future times? You should always be a little worried, keeps you on your toes and working to deserve me. He laughed, and the sound still made her heart skip in ways she couldn't control or predict. The restaurant was a success that night and every night that followed. She built something beautiful from the ashes of her captivity, transforming trauma into triumph through sheer determination. But the greatest transformation wasn't the restaurant or the money or the completely different life she now lived. The greatest transformation was internal, learning that she could hold multiple truths simultaneously without contradiction. He had been wrong to take her. She was right to be angry about it. They could still build something beautiful together despite that terrible beginning. The walls we build to trap others often become the prisons that hold us captive instead. But sometimes, if we're very lucky, those walls become the foundations for something stronger and more lasting than we ever imagined. Naomi had tried to leave the city and found something worth staying for instead. Yi-sun had tried to control his future and learned that love only flourishes when given freedom to grow. They had hurt each other deeply before learning how to heal together carefully. And in the end, that journey from pain to partnership was the most valuable thing either of them had ever built. Sometimes the person blocking your exit is redirecting you toward a destination you never knew you needed to find. And sometimes the prison we resist most desperately becomes the home we never want to leave. That's the thing about love in all its messy, complicated glory. It rarely follows the paths we plan or respects the boundaries we set. It grows where it chooses, blooms when it decides, and transforms everything it touches in ways we cannot predict. Naomi and Yi-sun's story began with a blocked road and ended with an open door. And every step of that journey, painful and beautiful in equal measure, taught them that the destination matters far less than who walks beside you along the way. Some cages are made of bars and locks and physical restraints that can be seen and measured. Others are made of fear and assumption and the rigid expectations we place on how life should unfold. The hardest prisons to escape are the ones we build inside our own minds. And sometimes, it takes someone unexpected to show us that the door was never really locked at all.